All right, I believe we're ready to get started. My name is Derek Mosley. I am the director of Marquette University Law School's Lubar Center for Public Policy Research and Civic Education. And it's my pleasure to welcome you here today to Battleground, Wisconsin. Before we get started, I want to tell you just a little bit about the Lubar Center and what we do here. The Lubar Center was started sort of as the state of Wisconsin's town hall. It is our mission to bring people together. When I say bring people together, people of different political ideologies, backgrounds, ethnicities, religions, to come in and to listen and to learn from each other. Unfortunately, we live in a society that's been very siloed. So we're a siloed society where we have surrounded ourselves with people who look like us and think like us, and we don't hear other types of opinions. And so our goal is to bring people together, to have those conversations, to talk, because we know when we have this type of schism, as we saw in recent history, unfortunately, it can devolve into just terrible, terrible situations. So that's what we do. We try to bring people together. And our goal today was to try to set up an event that let everybody know. When I say everybody, I'm talking about the national and international media know who we are as Wisconsinites. Because once again, Wisconsin is going to be a state that's going to have a pivotal role in who will be the next president of the United States. And so we knew the RNC was taking place here in Milwaukee, so we wanted to throw an event that lets you, the media, know exactly who we are as Wisconsinites and what's important to us. And we're going to do that a number of ways. First, we're going to talk to you about the history of Wisconsin and the elections here in Wisconsin. We've also put together a panel of local experts who will talk about what's going on in the field and on the ground in regards to issues which are important to them and their constituents. And then we're going to get information from the Marquette University Law School poll in regards to polling here in the state of Wisconsin. And then after all that is done, we're going to open it up for questions for the panel as well. So all the speakers who have come up and who spoke, you will have an opportunity to ask these individuals questions. So to get started, I'm going to introduce to you a longtime journalist here in Milwaukee as well as in Washington, D.C. for the local Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, and now a fellow, Lubar fellow here at the law school. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Craig Gilbert.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Obviously, yesterday was a really distressing day, and we all have a lot of questions going forward about what it means for the convention, what it means for the election, what it means for our political culture. But I think right now we're going to step back from that moment and sort of take a long view of this convention in terms of putting it in the context of where it's taking place. And we're talking about a state, Wisconsin, that is arguably the most competitive, has been the most competitive and contested kind of political turf in the country in the last decade or two. We can talk some more about that, but I want to offer a little context, a little history, a little geography about this state that I've been covering since the late 1980s. And as someone who has covered a lot of Wisconsin elections, you sort of find yourself asking yourself a lot of questions about a battleground state like Wisconsin. Like, why is Wisconsin a battleground? Why has it been a battleground for so long? Why has it continued over many, many, many years and many political cycles to be basically a 50-50 state, despite huge changes in our national politics and despite dramatic changes within Wisconsin, the regional politics of Wisconsin, voting patterns and trends, which I'm going to talk about. But somehow these things have kind of been a partisan wash, and Wisconsin is a very different state than it was 20 years ago politically, but it's kind of the same state with respect to its status as a very purple battleground. Another question that I find myself asking often about the state is are we a sort of microcosm politically of the nation, or are we an outlier? I mean, we're certainly the fact that we're so evenly divided. Wisconsin was the tipping point state in both 2016 and 2020, which means it was in the exact center of the Electoral College. It was the state that mathematically put the winning candidate, one from each party in each of those elections, into an electoral majority of 270. And so it kind of makes us think of Wisconsin as a microcosm of a very competitive nation. It's certainly a microcosm of a very polarized nation. And it's a microcosm of a lot of trends that people in politics think about all the time, like the urban-rural divide, just partisan polarization, the way so much of the country has kind of sorted itself into very politically like-minded communities, the decline of ticket splitting, all these things about our national politics you find very much so in Wisconsin. But it's also kind of an outlier in some respects. The fact that it's so competitive makes it an outlier, because now we're down to like 5 or 6 battlegrounds when we used to be talking in the old days about 17 or 20 battlegrounds. It's arguably the most enduring battleground along with Pennsylvania. I mean, we've got other states that didn't used to be battlegrounds and are today, like Georgia and Arizona, and states that used to be battlegrounds like Iowa and Missouri and Ohio, that used to be like iconic battlegrounds that are no longer competitive. And so it's an outlier in that sense. It's the highest turnout of all the true battlegrounds in terms of the percentage of voters that actually participate in the elections. It's the whitest of all the battlegrounds. It's the most sort of blue-collar white of all the battlegrounds. That describes, if you talk about non-college white voters, which is a demographic that's gotten a lot of attention in the Trump era because it's considered demographically to be part of the Trump base. It's a group of voters that has trended in a Republican direction. Wisconsin, that's a majority of voters in Wisconsin. And so that makes it an interesting state. And it's interesting, and I'll talk about this, that even though that demographic, even though it's the stereotype of that demographic is that it's very Republican, it's actually less Republican in Wisconsin than it is in a lot of other places. And it's actually an very important segment of the electorate to both parties in Wisconsin. So when we talk about the durability of Wisconsin as a battleground, it's the only state that's been decided in 4 of the last 6 elections by less than a percentage point. Those were the 2 Bush elections, 2000 and 2004, and the 2 Trump elections of 2016 and 2020. But like I said before, the map, if you're looking, let's see if I can do this. There's our map. 2 very different maps. 2004 presidential election, shaded in red and blue, and the 2020 presidential election, shaded in red and blue. When I started covering politics in Wisconsin in the late 80s and early 90s, there were a whole bunch of things about Wisconsin that seemed very idiosyncratic, that stood out as different from the patterns you saw in a lot of states. And two of the ones that I found myself writing about a lot one of them involved rural voters and one of them involved suburban voters. On the rural side, you had this really interesting phenomenon where, let's see if I can, here we go. Can you see that? There, oh, I gotta hold it. So upper Mississippi River right here. And the border between Wisconsin and Iowa and Wisconsin and Minnesota. Very rural white counties, sparsely populated. Again, the kind of counties that in most parts of the country would be voting reliably Republican. But for decades, they were voting Democratic for president. Not by a lot, but they were consistently voting Democratic for president. That's why Bill Clinton in 1992 took bus trips up the western corridor of Wisconsin. I remember one where we were arriving at bars after closing time at 2 o'clock in the morning, all the way to La Crosse, where thousands of people at 3 o'clock in the morning were waiting to greet Al Gore and Bill Clinton. It's why Al Gore, right after the 2000 convention, flew to La Crosse and got on a houseboat and went down the Mississippi River And it was considered by Karl Rove, the architect of the Bush campaign, a masterstroke, because not only you got into these markets that weren't very directly well served by big television stations, and again, purple to slightly blue counties. In each of these cycles, some people were continually shocked that these kinds of counties were continuing to vote Democratic. And it's why in 2004, both candidates spent a ton of time crisscrossing a pretty sparsely populated part of the state in buses, to the point where they were basically almost campaigning like aldermen for local office. It was retail politics all the way, hitting repeat visits to small towns and cities of 500 people. That was the sort of quirky thing about Wisconsin on the rural side. Bill Clinton won the rural vote, marginally in 1996 in Wisconsin. John Kerry was competitive. He lost it by double digits, but Joe Biden lost it by twice as much as John Kerry lost it by. So things have changed. Things have also changed on the suburban side. The suburban quirk in Wisconsin was that these suburban counties outside Milwaukee, which I'm talking about, these three counties that are red on the 2004 map, the WOW counties, the famous WOW counties, Washington, Ozaukee, and Washington, were a lot more Republican than most suburban counties outside of northern cities. They were so Republican that they were, when you factor in turnout, they were arguably the best performing Republican counties in the country. They turned out at incredible rates, and Republicans generated landslides there. They were also, routinely the most Republican counties in Wisconsin. And that was true in the 90s and the 2000s. And they were so Republican that the Milwaukee metropolitan area, which is made up of blue Milwaukee County and these three Republican WOW counties, that collectively the Milwaukee metropolitan area was more Republican than the state as a whole. This is a major metropolis, and it was more Republican than the state as a whole. It was carried by George Bush twice, the Milwaukee metropolitan area. All that has changed since 2016. Now, Metro Milwaukee is about 10 points Democratic, factoring in both the city and the suburbs. Major swing, and these communities in the WOW counties that used to be plus 40 or plus 45 Republican are now plus 5, plus 10, plus 15 Republican. And these counties are no longer, not only are they no longer the most Republican counties in Wisconsin, but Ozaukee County, which used to be the most Republican county and is the most sort of highest education levels, highest income levels in the state, is not only no longer the most Republican county in the state, it's like 44th. In terms of the size of the Republican margins it generates. So these are huge changes. They're changes in what we thought of for a long time as kind of hallmarks of Wisconsin politics, but they are also changes in which the state is kind of becoming more like the nation as a whole, and it's starting to conform to these national trends, but they're happening later, and they're more jarring because it wasn't that long ago that Democrats were unusually competitive with rural voters here, and Republicans were unusually strong with suburban voters, at least in southeastern Wisconsin. So that has had a big impact on the electoral math in Wisconsin. If you compare our 2004 map to our 2020 map, again, at the top line level, it's almost the same election. I mean, Democrats won this election for president by 11,000 votes, and they won this election for president by 20 or 21,000 votes. So almost no difference. But look at the map. I mean, what you see is all these counties here that were blue are mostly red. And then you see the reddening of the map in north and central Wisconsin. And then you also see here, outside of Milwaukee, Washington County is still pretty red, of the three counties, but Waukesha, which was carried by George Bush by 36 points in 2004, was carried by Donald Trump by 23 points. And Ozaukee by much smaller margins, single digits now over here. I think for governor, the WOW counties, Scott Walker carried them by 46 points in 2014. Republicans won them by 23 points 8 years later, half the margin. So none of these communities in the WOW counties ever voted Democratic for governor or president for decades. And those streaks ended in the last campaign for governor and the last campaign for president. The old map, Metro Milwaukee was like the most polarized place on earth. We did a whole project on this with the Lubar Center and the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. The gap between the blue part of Metro Milwaukee and the red part was bigger than almost anywhere else in the country in terms of urban and suburban. And so that urban-suburban gap is now getting smaller, not bigger, because the red parts are getting less red. In Wisconsin, and we're talking about a shift. If you just look at the four-county Milwaukee area, and Dane County, which is the fastest growing county in Wisconsin, the area around Madison, which is incredibly blue and gets bluer every year and gets bigger every year, and it's a huge part of the math in Wisconsin. Those four counties, Metro Milwaukee, Metro Madison, a net shift between these two elections of about 190,000 votes in a Democratic direction. But guess what? On the other side, everything outside those four counties collectively, a net shift toward the Republican Party of a little less than 190,000 votes. So again, that's how Wisconsin has, in a strange way, and almost a mystifying way, remained a battleground, even though so much has changed within the state. So let me speed ahead to today and the 2024 elections. In the Trump era, it's been a struggle for Republicans. Since Trump was elected president in Wisconsin, they've won two big elections by very, very narrow margins. They won a race for Senate last time, Ron Johnson, by a point, and they won a big state Supreme Court race. I'm considering these judicial races we have in the spring, which are nonpartisan, as major Wisconsin elections, because now they're very politicized, and they're very important politically to both parties. So they've won those two elections, but they've lost collectively 7 elections for Supreme Court, for Senate, for governor, and for president. If you compare that to the Obama era and the Scott Walker era, Republicans were winning most of those elections. So they've not only lost most of those elections, but their ceiling has been about 50%, 51% tops, whereas Democrats have won some elections by much bigger margins. So if you're thinking about kind of what you worry about as a Republican about this election, you've got those sort of recent election history of Wisconsin. You've got this kind of steady erosion in the suburbs, not just in the WOW counties. The suburbs around Madison have gone from purple to as blue in many cases as the city of Madison. The suburbs right around Milwaukee on the north side, in some cases, are as blue as the city of Milwaukee or the city of Madison, and they used to be purple. And the WOW counties are getting less red. So those are concerns, because those changes are happening across races for court, races for Senate, races for governor, races for president. So if you're a Republican, you're concerned about that. You're concerned about the growth of Dane County, which keeps adding to the Republican margin statewide, cycle after cycle. And that's a trend that doesn't seem to ever plateau. And you're worried, I think you have some turnout concerns, because now Donald Trump's success has been dependent on turning out a lot of sporadic voters, which he has turned out. But that can be a big lift, voters who are not voting in all the midterms. And those are some challenges the Republicans face. The Democrats have big worries of their own. This collapse in rural counties is a huge problem for Democrats. It's a big problem in legislative races, in congressional races. But the question is, how much lower can the Democrats perform in these rural parts of the state? I mentioned, if you add up all the towns in Wisconsin, there's like 1,200 of them. That's a pretty good facsimile of the rural vote. Bill Clinton won the town vote by 1 point in 1996. John Kerry lost it by 14 points in 2004, and Joe Biden lost it by 25 points in 2020. That's a lot of votes. So the small counties and the small towns are a problem for Democrats. The city of Milwaukee, I mean, there's polling suggesting slippage, erosion for Democrats with Black and Hispanic voters. That's a big part of the electorate in the city of Milwaukee. Democrats now routinely worry about turnouts in the city of Milwaukee, not just the vote. They're winning the city of Milwaukee by 60 points routinely, which is more than they used to win it by, but it's generating fewer votes, partly because of population trends and partly just because of turnout problems. And so Democrats aren't getting the margins out of the city of Milwaukee that they got in the Obama years. So this is a concern. And whatever inroads, if Republicans can turn that 58-point margin into a 55 or 52-point margin in a very close election, that's a big problem for Democrats. Turnout is an even bigger concern, I think, for Democrats than Republicans. The polling that we do here at Marquette, that Charles does, he always routinely asks, how enthusiastic are you about voting in the next election? And everybody's less enthusiastic about this election. That's why we have so many, quote, double haters, people that dislike both candidates. But Democrats are that much less enthusiastic than Republicans. So you wonder, how can that not be a problem for Democrats? I mean, there may be reasons for that, but how can that not be a problem for Democrats? And we're not even getting into the specifics and the dynamics of this race post-debate and everything else that's happened. So in the end, when I come back to the question of, why is Wisconsin a battleground, it's kind of a funny question because it's partly a process of elimination. If you're talking about a state where there's a dominant segment of the electorate that is dominated by one party, you're not going to have a battleground state. And so Wisconsin, that's not the case. Wisconsin has a pretty even distribution of suburban, urban, and rural voters. If the non-white portion of the Wisconsin electorate were bigger, it would be a blue state. But if the white portion of the electorate, which is big, were more Republican, like it is in a lot of states, it would be a red state. I mean, demographically, you would think Wisconsin is a red state, but despite the slippage in rural areas and among non-college white voters in Wisconsin, those voters are still less Republican. They're not landslide Republican, and they're less Republican than they are in a lot of states. And what's easy to forget is that those voters are very important to the Democratic Party as well. I mean, Charles' polling shows that the percentage of Democratic voters who are white and don't have a college degree, it's almost half. It's 45% of the Democratic vote. This demographic that we think of as kind of a more pro-Trump demographic is hugely important to the Democratic Party in Wisconsin, even though they're not performing as well with those voters as they used to. So these are some of the reasons why Wisconsin is a battleground. Whether it continues to be a battleground, all the arrows are pointing in that direction when you have the last two elections being jump ball elections, when every poll that Charles has done suggests it's a jump ball election, whether you include leaners, whether you include undecideds, whether you ask about all 6 candidates that could be on the ballot, or whether you just ask about both candidates. That has been the pattern. So I wouldn't expect that these patterns to change anytime soon, but I would really look for changes, and they may be modest changes, in the political map in Wisconsin, even though we have the same 2 candidates on the ballot. Can Republicans sort of stem their erosion in the suburbs? Can Democrats stem their erosion in the small towns and rural counties? And what does the city of Milwaukee look like this November? So I'm going to wrap it up there, and we'll go on to the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you. So at this point, we've put together a panel of sort of subject matter experts. I want to introduce that panel to you. To my left, I have the mayor of Muskego, Wisconsin, Rick Petfalski. Muskego falls within the Wow County. It's in Waukesha County. So thank you, Rick, for coming.
Thanks for having me.
To his left, we have RNC delegate Gerard Randall. Gerard, thank you so much for coming, and a Milwaukee resident. And to the left of Gerard, we have Milwaukee County Supervisor Deanna Alexander. She's also the town of Brookfield's clerk, which is in Waukesha County. And you are currently an independent candidate for the assembly. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right, so thank you all for being here. I'm just going to start with the first question, and it was sort of where Craig ended, and that has to do with how is the enthusiasm that you see in your constituents, Rick, in Muskego, Deanna, your constituents not only here in Milwaukee, but what you see as a town clerk in the town of Brookfield, and Gerard is a delegate. What's the enthusiasm for this election?
I think it's at a pretty high level. We're a few months out right now, but just monitoring conversations around our community, on, we're coming, everything circles back to the election, it seems. You could talk about a kid's Little League game, and somehow it finds its way back to the election. So it is front and foremost in a lot of people's minds, at least in our community.
Okay. Gerard?
Yeah, in 1994, I coordinated Governor Thompson's Central City campaign, and that was the last statewide Republican to garner over 25% of the African-American vote. This election is going to hinge on the votes of people of color and student votes. In Dane County, it'll be the student votes. The University of Wisconsin system has over 135,000 full-time equivalent students around the state, and they will certainly have an impact on the vote in Dane County. In Milwaukee, you'll have the impact of voters of color that will come out. And I'd say the enthusiasm level among African-American voters in particular is diminished to the point where the Democrats will have a hard time, as Craig had already pointed out. A 5% drop in the African-American vote from 2020 to this year, this year's election, is going to lead to, I think, the election of both President Trump and the Senate candidate, Eric Hovde.
Deanna?
I think we need to pull apart the idea of enthusiasm about participating in the election, having your voice heard, having choices, and being passionate about what the choices are. Because I am seeing that when I knock doors or in my work as a clerk, that it seems that more people are interested in learning about the voting process, learning how can they vote early, learning why do we have primary elections and why do we have 4 this year, and how does that work? So I'm seeing, at least I feel like there's an uptick in that without necessarily looking at the numbers. I know that spring voter turnout was a lot lower than what we expected it to be. But when I'm on doors and talking to people, they're not passionate about the options and people are frustrated. And even though that's a little bit of a sad thing to hear, I'm seeing unity in the trends in frustration. Whether I'm talking to a more conservative voter or a more liberal voter, I'm seeing unity in how people are saying, really, this is where we're at, this is what we're doing. And so voters are very interested in the same things right now and have a lot of commonalities, and they're getting more involved. But wading through, no disrespect to the media, but what the media pumps at them has become very challenging over the years. So more involvement, more enthusiasm about knowing what's going on, figuring out what's true, what's not true, and what are my options, but less passionate about those individual options to a degree.
All right, thank you. My next question has to do with importance of issues. And so, Rick, I know you're really involved not only in Muskego politics, but also what's going on in Waukesha County. So when you're going around, you're running for your own office, or you're just having conversations, as you mentioned, at Little League games, what are the issues that are important to the voters in Waukesha County?
I'll go back to James Carville's comment back in '96. It's the economy, stupid. It really is. I think that's the number one thing that people are talking about. And at a local level, I think one of the things that we look at is Muskego's a very sought-after community to live in. Our home prices values have jumped dramatically to the point where that next generation is finding difficulty affording it, and it's because of interest rates and what they used to be able to buy even 4 years ago to what they can buy now, because interest rates going from 2.5% to 7% gives them a lot less home buying ability. And I think that really the economy and the overall, specifically interest rates and the affordability of having a home right now is a big thing.
Gerard, you're well connected in many circles, specifically here in Milwaukee, the black community.
For the good and the bad.
Yeah, but in the black community here in Milwaukee, what do you see as the issues that are important in this election? 2 primary issues. The economy, as the mayor had pointed out, certainly is the overwhelming issue. People look at food prices, they look at the cost of buying a home,
and sustaining a home, frankly, because the prices for remodeling a home, building a home have also increased. And then the interest rates have increased for home buyers. And that's always been a market that has been a challenge for people of color around the state. The other is personal safety. And when we begin to look at the level of crime in our major cities, people have this sense that something has to be done, and whoever can offer the best approach to dealing with the crime that they're experiencing or the threat of crime that they're experiencing. It all comes down to people's sense of fear, and whether it's around the border issues or whether it's around what's happening in their own neighborhood, there is that sense that whoever can offer the best approach is going to garner their attention and hopefully their vote.
Deanna, same question.
I think people are wanting safe neighborhoods, encapsulating, yes, they're looking for assurances of safety and feelings of safety, but they're also looking for knowing that if their child with autism that's nonverbal has a police interaction, they don't have to fear as a parent what that interaction might look like. They want to know that they are safe from criminals and also that the law enforcement there to protect them is operating in a safe and reasonable manner. I think that there's an overarching sense of stop the nonsense. Can we have sensible community policies, and what do those look like? And our communities are different from place to place, but there's unity in Wisconsin right now of, can we just stop the cacophony and the noise and get down to business? Because the back and forth that we had been a very divided state that, we could call purple over history. And when you look at those maps, it makes it look divided. But I think today there's just so much more unity in what everybody wants. And then inflation is out of control. And while I agree with the other commenters about the concept of the economy, the average Wisconsin voter is not sitting at their kitchen table at night talking with their family about GDP. They're talking about whether or not they could afford to buy 2 gallons of milk versus 1 gallon of milk that week. And so if we sit here and we talk about the economy, we get into this high level of discussion that we could certainly all have, and it's worth looking at, but not when we're trying to figure out what's important to the baseline voter. It's not the economy in that sense. It's the inflation and how it's affecting families at the ground level.
Thank you. So the RNC's here this coming week, and I just want to know from each of you, what are you looking to hear during the convention as we move forward to the election in November?
I really hope they use this opportunity of taking their key platform items and finding ways to tie that to the average voter. Deanna just made a great point. When I mentioned the economy, I was talking more macroly, not getting more into the specifics of it, but it's the same thing, taking border security and making the average voter realize or relate to that, how that can actually turn into my feeling safe versus another narrative on that. So if they can find ways of tying their platform into something that the average household can understand and relate to, that's what I'd like to see.
Thank you.
I have something of a different take.
Yeah, and I was waiting to hear from you, Gerard, because we've talked about this on several occasions.
Having been involved in wooing the RNC here, it's an opportunity to reimagine the hospitality industry for this region. We have a new convention hall that's doubled in size. The Fiserv Forum is a state-of-the-art facility for hosting major events. And getting the convention here while the eyes of the world are all on Milwaukee to showcase what we have to offer and what we have to extend to future opportunities for major events coming to Milwaukee is an economic blessing for this community and for the state, frankly. So what I'm hoping is that we can give the folks who are coming here the chance to appreciate what we have here in Milwaukee, and that they'll come back and spend more money. and build the economy for this region.
And you talked about the last question in regards to the turnout vote of African Americans in Milwaukee. What are you looking to hear from in the convention in regards to wooing more African American voters?
Well, certainly the party has made a great effort in extending outreach into the African American and Latino voters. We have offices that are both on the north side and the south side of the city of Milwaukee that are specifically geared towards extending the message into the African American community. And I think there's a receptivity there among African American voters, just premised on what the other commentators have said around the economy and this sense of personal safety that everyone is talking about. I'd throw a third issue in there that's specific kind of to this area, and that's education. And so when people are having those conversations, those are the things that they want to see something done about. And again, it's whoever offers the best approach. And people are now more willing to listen to the Republican message around those issues than they had been, I'd say, even in 2020 or 2016.
Deanna, you're currently running for election. So what are you looking to hear from those who are speaking this week at the RNC?
I would draw on some of my experience also running prior elections. I am a white woman representing a majority-minority district. My predecessors in my county board role, my predecessor was African-American, and in my prior races, I have been asked things about race relations or why do I think that I as a white woman can represent a majority black community, et cetera. I think that when we start talking about the party platforms and what different sides of the aisles are putting out, we become hyper-focused on what are they doing to recruit. And there's always this battle, especially from the GOP, of how do we get more black and brown voters to see our perspective. Completely understandable from the inside of, the party's brain strategizing of how do we grow, how do we succeed. However, if we're talking about what the messaging is, it's time for the party to stop having outward messaging of here's how we're going to get more black and brown voters, and instead talking about here's what we're going to do, whether they vote for us or not, and how we're going to serve them, because that is our job. If we are asking to be leaders in this country, in this state, in our communities, we need to know and have a plan on how to serve them, whether they like us, whether they vote for us, and we need to promote that plan in unity rather than saying, hey, I think this might appeal to you. How can I recruit you to get you on my side? It's not about persuasion, it's about service. And if they can get that message down, and of course the media carry that out to the public in a way that the average person sitting down after work to watch TV and go, oh my goodness, what happened at the RNC this week? If they can get that message through, that it's about service, they're gonna have success.
If I can
Please
build on that. The African-American members of Congress that are Republican, they'll all be here, and they've banded together and raised a considerable amount of money to extend outreach into the African-American community through grassroots organizations. And so that message is going to get out there. They're led by Tim Scott, and they've raised tens of millions of dollars just for that effort in the targeted swing states. Milwaukee being one of those, where a significant amount of resources is going to be spent to have a grassroots infrastructure to, first off, persuade those folk that they would need to consider the Republican Party, but also to say, just as Deanna had pointed out, we're going to deliver on those things that are important to you.
I'm going to ping pong with you here. When I'm out on doors, I find that there are a lot more moderate or conservative voters in the African American community and other communities of color than people realize. Mm-hmm. However, I feel that when you talk with people on their doorstep one-on-one, the word Republican is a dirty word to them and has certain connotations very often. And they may have conservative values or moderate values if you talk about things on a piece-by-piece basis. But specifically in Milwaukee as a metro area, I think that many black and brown voters were raised in families that said, we're Democrats, this is what you rely on, this is part of our fabric of who we are. And because that word of we are Democrats has been sort of ingrained into a lot of family structures and passed down, the concept of identifying with the word Republican is scary. And I think that if you're just talking the issues, you find that a lot of voters are very moderate and not really wanting to dive into the nitty-gritty of the parties and be divided. But when they're forced to, they'll go with the public labels that their families and that their community structure is more familiar with and comfortable with, because it is very controversial, I think, for Milwaukee's Black and brown voters to outwardly say, I agree with the Republicans.
That's an accurate portrayal for today. But my generation is one older than yours, and so my parents and grandparents, many of them were Republican. They voted Republican consistently. And it's only been since the Franklin Roosevelt era that you began to see this switch in Black voters who were consistently Republican moving over to the Democratic Party side, beginning with Kennedy and then moving forward with Lyndon Johnson. And I look at the message that's being delivered through families today, especially in major cities, about voting Republican. It is a bugaboo. And I think that's something that's slowly changing, but not overwhelmingly changing.
I think it comes down to what Deanna had said earlier, though. It's all about service, and the side that can get the voters, Black, brown, white, any, to understand that they're actually going to be serving their needs. I think that's what it really comes down to, because when they don't see the results of any service from either of the candidates, they will revert back to the party lines then at that point.
All right. I want to thank you all. Can we give a round of applause to our panel, please? Thank you all.
We're done.
Well, you want to get up and leave?
No.
But I will ask.
Got some place to go?
But I will ask you to have a seat right there in the front in the reserve section. And at this time, I'm going to call up to the podium John Johnson, who is our public policy fellow at the Lubar Center. John, please.
Good to see you all. Thanks for coming and welcome to Milwaukee. A theme in today's presentations that Craig really hit on is the genuinely remarkable way that voting patterns within Wisconsin have changed, even as the state as a whole has remained evenly divided. Donald Trump lost the state by fewer than 21,000 votes, as Craig mentioned, in 2020. George Bush lost it by fewer than 6,000 votes in the year 2000. So our narrow division is familiar, but on the other hand, the average Wisconsinite lives in a town whose vote has shifted by about 15 points one direction or the other between those elections. In this way, Wisconsin, despite being demographically dissimilar from the country as a whole, we're older, more of our population is white, education levels are a little lower, the state still encapsulates the basic partisan division of the country arguably better than anywhere else. I regularly encounter journalists, perhaps some of you, who want to write a story about how their favorite subset of the electorate will decide the next election in Wisconsin. And I guess it's true that most groups of voters you might think of do technically numerically exceed the margin between the Democratic and Republican presidential candidates in most Wisconsin elections, but you can tell a lot of those stories. For the next few minutes, I'm going to show you some of the trends in Wisconsin politics that I think matter most, and I'm going to do it using this brand new web book of Wisconsin election results that we've created here at the Lubar Center. My goal is that this web book can be a resource for all of you to answer your own questions about electoral trends throughout the state. So I recommend beginning on the page that introduces how each county votes. We also have individual chapters for each county. There's a bunch of statistics here, including demographic facts and election results for every race for president, governor, US Senator, and the House of Representatives from 2000 through 2022. Right now, I'm going to focus on these scatter plots. So this graph shows on the x-axis the outcome of the 2020 presidential election, and on the y-axis how each county shifted relative to 2016. So in 2020, the 14 counties on this side of the graph were won by Joe Biden, and Trump won the other 58 on this side of the graph. Relative to 2016, 32 counties, those on the top half, shifted towards Biden, and the remainder, 40 counties, shifted towards Trump. In the upper right quadrant, we have those counties which lean Democratic and which got more Democratic between 2016 and 2020. There are few enough of them that I'm going to name them all, since they represent several different archetypes that I think are common across the country. They include the two largest counties, Milwaukee and Dane, which is home to Madison, the state capital. It also has a couple counties that host large college towns. These are Eau Claire and La Crosse. Eau Claire is in the northwestern part of the state. La Crosse is along the Mississippi River border with Minnesota, the area that Craig was talking about the boat tours going through. Then we have two historically union-strong kind of white working class counties, Rock, which is along the border with Illinois, and Douglas County, which is in the extreme northwestern part of the state, close to Duluth. There's a very large port there. There are also a handful of more rural counties. Sauk and Greene are both outside Madison and a little bit part of the gravitational pull of that metro area. Door and Bayfield counties are both Great Lakes destinations that have, I guess you could call, kind of a crunchy vibe. And then there's Menominee County, which is essentially coterminous with the Menominee Nations Reservation. There are also 3 counties, all of them broadly rural, which did vote for Biden in 2020, but actually gave him less of the vote than Clinton got in 2016. Those are these 3 right here. They're Portage, Ashland, and Iowa counties. If you're looking for a historically Democratic place where many voters have soured on the current iteration of the Democratic Party, this is somewhere you could go. The largest block of counties are the 37 which voted for Trump in 2020 and also gave him a larger margin of victory than he received in 2016. Those are all those counties here. It includes a great many small rural places across the central, northern, and western parts of the state, but it does also include several large counties. The largest of them is Kenosha, which you may remember from headlines relating to a lot of social unrest there in the summer of 2020. Others include Fond du Lac, Dodge, and Manitowoc counties, all of which are located in the eastern half of the state, generally between Madison and Green Bay. Another 11 counties voted for Trump, but did so less enthusiastically than in 2016. And this is quite a diverse mix of counties in terms of population size and political lean. Some of them are large, some of them are small. Some of them only lean Republican, while others are ruby red, but all of them gave Biden more of the vote in 2020 than Clinton got in 2016. So this group includes a couple sparsely populated Northwoods counties, Vilas and Sawyer. It also includes 3 Fox Valley counties, Brown, Outagamie, and Winnebago. These collectively have a population of 630,000 people, which is practically identical in population to the more famous WOW counties that Craig mentioned, Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington. Brown, Outagamie, and Winnebago, my colleague Charles likes to call the BOW counties, though I don't think that acronym has quite caught on yet. But it's helpful to think about because they are actually the same number of people as in the Milwaukee Metro, and about the same number of votes. And then, of course, we do have those 3 WOW counties, Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington. As Craig described, they are historically famous for really being the center of gravity for the state GOP, and they remain the place where many, many of the state Republican politicians make their home. All 3 of them lean quite Republican, but Waukesha and Ozaukee have shifted towards the center particularly quickly over the past few cycles, with Waukesha moving a little bit towards the center, although less so than the other 2. We can also use our website to look at the individual municipalities within each county, which is even more revealing. I'll show you Milwaukee County's page first. So again, there are many statistics. I'm going to focus on that same kind of scatter plot. So again, we have the 2020 election on the x-axis and the shift from 2016 on the y-axis. The frame of the graph moves to focus on where those counties' municipalities are found. Trump lost Milwaukee County by 37 points in 2016 and by 40 points in 2020. But his declining popularity in the county came almost entirely from the Milwaukee County suburbs. Today, the village of Shorewood is actually the most Democratic-leaning Milwaukee County municipality, not the city of Milwaukee. And incidentally, I noticed that there is one RNC event happening in the village of Shorewood. It's the Utah delegation's luncheon. From 2016 to 2020, the city of Wauwatosa, where Scott Walker began his political career, shifted toward the Democrats by over 12 points, more than any other Milwaukee County community. And here's another feature of the website I want to highlight. You can use these interactive tables we have to sort and filter the data in all kinds of ways. You can filter by municipality, year, and office. So here I'm going to show you the vote for president in the city of Wauwatosa over the last 2 decades. You can see that George Bush won 56% of the vote in 2000, 53% in 2004. Then McCain won only 46% in 2008. Romney won 49% in 2012. And then in 2016, Trump won 35% to Clinton's 57%. And in 2020, Trump's share fell to 32%, while Biden's rose to 2/3, 66%. Another way we can use these tables is to look at how all municipalities voted within a given year. So we might want to see how many Milwaukee County municipalities voted Republican in races for governor, which we can do by pretty swiftly sorting like this. And what we can see is a really remarkable trend. In 2018, well, let's go to 2012 during the recall election. In that year, 12 out of 19 Milwaukee County municipalities voted for Scott Walker. In 2018, when Walker lost his reelection campaign against the Democrat Tony Evers, only 6 municipalities voted for Walker. And in 2022, only 3 municipalities voted for the Republican candidate. So that's one kind of place in Wisconsin where all the municipalities are shifting away from Republicans. But something very different is happening in another southeastern Wisconsin county, Kenosha. I'll show you their page here. Or I would if we hadn't just lost our internet connection. So in Kenosha County, which is located in the extreme southeastern part of the state, every municipality, here we go, almost every municipality has shifted towards the Republicans. And remarkably, this includes the city of Kenosha, which is the only municipality in Kenosha County which leans Democratic. Kenosha City has shifted noticeably toward Trump from 2016 to 2020 by about 3 points in net, the kind of change that adds up across Wisconsin. We can also toggle the graphic to look at the same trend for gubernatorial races. And this is remarkable to me. The city of Kenosha shifted against the Democrat Tony Evers by nearly 6 points between 2018 and 2022. And this happened even as Evers improved his performance statewide. In other words, the shift toward the Republican Party has occurred in both presidential and gubernatorial races over the past 6 years. I want to show you one more county, which is Sauk County, located just northwest of Dane County, where the state capital is. Sauk County is similar to the state average in a lot of ways. The county's Black and Asian populations are smaller, but in other ways, it matches closely. College attendance is just slightly lower. Age, income, poverty rates, they're all quite similar. And Sauk County is also the closest thing to a bellwether in the state. Except for the 2014 governor's race, it has picked the statewide winner in every election for president, governor, and US Senate since the year 2000. Here is the trend over the past 2 presidential elections in Sauk County. As you can see, there's a bunch of towns over here which voted for Biden and a bunch that voted for Trump. But most of the towns did actually shift away from Trump between 2016 and 2020. On the other hand, here's that same kind of graph showing the presidential results. Most of the communities, including the largest ones, the city of Baraboo and the city of Reedsburg, actually shifted towards the Republican candidate between those 2 years. And again, 2022 was good for Democrats statewide. So which one of those is it going to be in November? We have 2 trends going in different directions. You know, if you'll tolerate a pretty bad cliche, I'm actually going to tell you a diner story from Sauk County. There's this one municipality in Sauk County, it's the village of Merrimack, that has actually been a perfect bellwether in races for president, governor, and senator over the last 22 years. There's about 1,800 municipalities in Wisconsin, and this is one of only 2 that has that status. The other one is the town of Harmony in Rock County. It's kind of poetic. Anyway, I rode my bike through Merrimack about a month ago, and I stopped for breakfast at the only diner in town. The neighbor across the street had this collection of carefully hand-painted signs with like anti-Joe Biden slogans on them, you know, China Joe and that kind of thing. But as I quietly drank my coffee, and I want to emphasize quietly, I don't bring up politics when I'm traveling in Wisconsin, I learned, totally unsolicited, that the woman running the diner had just gotten home from attending the state Democratic Party convention in Milwaukee, where she was a delegate. And that, to me, illustrated something important to remember. Sauk County, like Wisconsin, might be purple on the map, but it's not moderate or independent. Rather, it's full of this remarkably even balance of strong partisans, genuine liberals and conservatives. There's hardly anywhere that seems to actually be in the middle. All right.
All right, as I promised, at this time we're going to go into the polling in the state, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you the director of the Marquette University Law School poll, Dr. Charles Franklin.
Hey, thank you. There we go. That's the logo. So I want to echo everything that Craig and the panel and John have said. I will give you some of the more public opinion side rather than the voting statistics side. But I do encourage you to go to the website that John was showing you. It's mulawpoll.org if you didn't get that. And you can browse this and see all the communities and voting patterns in the state. We've validated that against official returns because the Wisconsin Elections Commission no longer posts their archive of election results past about 2016. So if you need to know what happened in 2008, we've got that data for you. Okay, so are we a close swing state? Are we the tipping point state? Why, yes, I believe we are. Here's the 2020 election, the bluest states, the reddest states. 269 is the tipping point, and there's Wisconsin right in the middle. I would, just to brag, show you the 2016 results, where we're also the tipping point state. But let's not beat that horse. So this could change, of course. What makes us the tipping point state, in part, depends on Michigan, Nevada, and Pennsylvania staying to our left, and Arizona and Georgia staying to our right, and North Carolina staying put further to the right. All of those look like they're in flux and could change this year. And so we're not guaranteed to be the tipping point state, but come on, folks, be nice to us. Keep us in the tipping point. Here's what the map that I know you all are familiar with looks like, with the 7 swing states, including North Carolina, plus the 6 states that Biden narrowly won in 2020. You can see that nobody gets to the Electoral College majority out of that, hence tipping points. But what does the race look like there? It looks like this. Mostly a sea of red in the polling averages. I have 538's polling average and Real Clear Politics here, so you can take whichever one you prefer, though mostly they're telling you the same story. It's clear from both of these averages, both before the debate and after the debate, that the 3 Midwestern states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, are a little closer than the 3 Sun Belt states, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. That's been persistent all year. It was true before the Trump conviction. It was true before the debate, and it was true as of last night when I updated these. So I don't know where it is today, but this is where it was last night. And so what you see here is that there's been a lot of talk about the blue wall, the term that was coined and then shattered in 2016 when President Trump won Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and hence the presidency. But I think from this and from the polling generally, and our polling here in Wisconsin, it's much less a blue wall than it is blue tissue paper. And from this, you can see it's not even quite blue at this point. So all of this was reflective of where the race was before recent events, the debate and, of course, the assassination attempt yesterday. Wisconsin, I would point out near the bottom, is the one of these that has had the polling averages a little closer than the other states. But here's the trend since the debate in particular from Real Clear. And I think there are 2 things. One, I'd really like you to notice that this has been a within 2-point race all year long. We've never gotten out of that margin. Right now, we're at like 2.6, I believe, is what Real Clear's estimate is. Still an awfully close race. But this is a game of inches, and when we're decided by 20,000 votes, you and 21,000 of your friends can change the election in Wisconsin. It's that close. The other thing I think is really striking, and I'm going to be watching for it over the next few weeks, is it's Biden who has really come down in these polls. The Trump vote has hardly changed since the debate. Now, I don't know if that'll persist. New polls are being added daily, of course, and we'll see how they shift. But it is, at least first take, interesting that the impact of the debate seems to have lowered Biden's support here in Wisconsin without raising Trump's support yet. We have not done a poll. We will do a poll right after the RNC, so we'll get an update on our polling then. This is what our data has shown through the campaign. And here I'm going to focus on the multi-candidate race, but it's basically the same story with a head-to-head 2-candidate race. Trump has had a small 2 to 1 to 3-point lead over Biden when you have all the other candidates included in the race. In our head-to-head race, it's been Biden by 2, Biden by 2, Trump ahead, tied, and Biden ahead and then tied. Anyway, 2 ties. Each one has been ahead once by a small margin. No obvious trend. And as you can see here, maybe you can see a trend there, but it's so small, it's so far inside the margin of error, you don't want to put much confidence in it. But one thing is interesting, and that's Kennedy's decline. He's gone from 17% to 13% to 8% in this latest poll. And that has been a kind of consistent trend that we've been watching in both our national as well as our state polls. Third-party candidates usually do fall off as the 2 major party candidates are selected and get through the conventions. The other third-party candidates are down in such low single digits, there's really no discernible trend. Jill Stein and Oliver for the Libertarians are already on the ballot in Wisconsin. Kennedy and West are not yet certified for the ballot. But there has been some change in Kennedy's support. The role that third parties can play in Wisconsin can easily be pivotal, at least in principle. We don't usually give a huge percentage of the vote to third parties. And in presidential races, the two big exceptions were 2016, when it was exceptionally high at 5.5%, and 2000, when it was just 4.5%, the second highest in a presidential race. The gubernatorial race there, that's the huge spike, was an active third-party candidate. But after those 2000 and 2016 elections, the third-party vote dropped dramatically to just 0.9 of a point in 2004 and to just 1.5% in 2020. So it's anybody's guess whether that decline from a super close race with a high third-party vote that then drops off in the following race, does that repeat? There are things in the water right now that we'll get to in a second that suggest we might see a bigger surge in third-party voting than we did in the earlier rounds. And here's some of that. Favorability to the candidates. Let's start with where we are right now. Biden's favorability has been modestly falling for a year, since June of 2023. It's not down tremendously, but it's down 5 points, from 45 to 40% favorable. Just for comparison, come back to where we were in the 2020 race, where he initially gets in the primary, doesn't do very well, his favorability drops, then he does well in South Carolina and goes on to win the nomination. And his favorability rises and rises, and then in the last two polls before the election, for the first time we saw him in net favorable territory, being slightly more favorable than unfavorable. Since he's been in the White House, except for the summer of 2021, he's been underwater, more unfavorable than favorable. And as you can see, that gap widened pretty rapidly in 2021 and has grown modestly over the last year, but it has put him further underwater now than he was a year ago. If we go to President Trump, he's sort of the reverse picture. If you look again just at the current period, his recent bottom was in June of 2023, but he's risen in 3 of the last 4 polls, with just the tiniest of dips in the June poll this year. However, his unfavorables are also a good deal higher than his favorables. That's true of both of these candidates. If we look back at the earlier history of Trump in the state, he was not at all popular in the state in 2015 and early 2016. You'd see this if I showed it to you for just Republicans as well. You'll remember he lost the Republican primary to Ted Cruz in that spring election. But as he did with the population as a whole, he especially did with Republicans, rising in favorability post-primary and especially accelerating after the 2016 nominating conventions and into the fall. Then once he takes the White House and is in office, there's another significant surge in his favorability ratings, again with Republicans and the public at large, and stayed relatively stable through his time in office. Among Republicans, between 80 and 90% favorable. But then when he left the White House, that dropped off by about 10 points or so with both the public at large and among Republicans, but has been rebuilding over the course of this last year, as you can see. Heard a lot about the double haters, so naturally we'll talk about double haters here, the people that don't like either Biden or Trump. And they're the purple line here. That's been running at 18 or 17%. Last June, it peaked at 20%. That's a significant chunk of the electorate. When we talk about that 20,000 vote difference out there, this 17% of the electorate could easily make up that 20,000 vote shift as well. I want to focus on the blue and the red lines here too, though. Blue is you have a favorable view of Biden and an unfavorable view of Trump. Red is you have a favorable view of Trump and an unfavorable view of Biden. And a year ago, Biden had a definite advantage in that. But those lines have crossed, with Trump holding the advantage in the last two surveys in April and again in June. So while neither of them is absolutely popular, both are underwater, the advantages of one over the other have shifted and shifted to a slight Trump advantage, and we still leave that 17% out there who don't like either one. If you go back to 2020, though, you might be surprised to see that people really didn't dislike them both a whole lot then. In that race, it did peak at about 20% that disliked both, but it was mostly 10% through most of the year, and then just before the election fell to only about 5% double haters in 2020. So this year does look a lot different. If you go to 2016, though, through much of the year, double haters were up in the high 20% range here in Wisconsin. It fell off to the low 20s just before the election. So even then, still a little bit higher than it is right now. But those double haters have to be a big recipe for driving down turnout, but also for driving third-party vote. And so in this mystery of what will third-party vote actually end up being, one of the big questions is, do the people that dislike both Biden and Trump really do go ahead and vote third party, or do they come home to the lesser of two evils as they see it? What we're seeing they're doing right now is they started out saying they were voting for Robert Kennedy, but that has fallen and now fallen even more sharply recently. Biden had a slight edge with the double haters for 2 polls, but now in June we saw Trump take the slimmest of leads there. And you see Stein's vote coming down. West has bumped up, but again, that's a small fraction. And for the first time, we have Oliver on for the Libertarians, getting just a tiny bit. So it certainly does look like the double haters are inclined to third-party voting, but they're certainly less so now than they were earlier in the year. Part of that is Kennedy's favorability has been dropping. We've shown in both state and national polls all year that Kennedy was more attractive to Republicans than to Democrats or independents. And that is held up in both our state and national polling. But Kennedy's favorability, net favorability here, has been declining steadily with Republicans, declining a little more sharply with independents, and it was never high and is basically flat with Democrats. So that's also part of, as Kennedy comes down, it's at the margins good for Trump because those Republicans that like and are drawn to Kennedy are more likely to come back to him. Biden's problem is the other third-party candidates who hurt him without taking much away from Trump, but there are not very many of them. Let's quickly check the time, issues of the race. So this is sorted in the order of who's better on each of these issues. And the top left is Trump's largest advantage is on immigration and border security. Second, the economy. Third, the Israel-Hamas war. Foreign relations is real close, but just the smallest edge for Trump. But then the other consistent ones are for Biden, a slight advantage on Medicare and Social Security and health care, and a slight, possibly increasing edge on abortion policy. But the 3 issues that Biden has the advantage on, he has smaller advantages than the 3 that Trump has the advantage on. So 3 issues for each of them, bigger advantages for Trump on the first 3, smaller but persistent advantages for Biden on the last 3. We asked people which of those issues is the most important for deciding your vote. And there are big partisan differences here. So overall, the biggest issue is the economy. But you can see the red dot for Republicans is way out there. Independents are a ways back, but still their first issue, and then Democrats quite lower on saying the economy is most important. Immigration and border security is the second most important overall, quite big for Republicans, less than the economy, but still quite large. Independents agree it's their second highest, though lower. But it's really striking how few Democrats name immigration as an important issue. Only about 3% of Democrats say that. So this is a wide gap between the parties. Then it goes the other way around. If we go overall, I should say, abortion policy and Medicare and Social Security are fairly close together. But you can see that Medicare and abortion is the highest issue for Democrats, and the second highest issue for Democrats is Medicare and Social Security. Then there's quite a gap, but independents rate Medicare and Social Security fairly high, while Republicans are quite low on that. But abortion policy may be the more important one to look at. Democrats have focused on this issue. Their party's very united on the issue. And if we get to it, which we may not, so I'll just tell you the punchline, independents are much more in favor of abortion rights than Republicans are, a bit less in favor than Democrats are. But their rating the importance of that issue is dramatically less. So how does that issue play out in the fall? And I'm going to skip the others where they're not rated very highly and the partisan differences are not great. The main thing is we have kind of two different worlds. For Republicans, the economy and immigration is the end of the story. For Democrats, it's abortion and Medicare, and then they kind of grudgingly say the economy, and they put immigration way at the bottom. Now we're looking at the other side of this. Political science, we used to talk about parties, issues, and candidates as the key ingredients in elections. So here are the candidates. There are two negative images up here. Too old to be president. Guess who wins that one? Remember, this is pre-debate, but just under 80% saying that applies to Biden, though it's over 50% that say it applies to Trump. This is also part of the, oh, don't we all wish we had younger candidates, but has behaved corruptly. Over 60% say that describes Trump. It's a little over 40% that say it describes Biden. So here are two relatively negative characteristics, and one of them really applies to Biden, one really applies to Trump. Then we get a couple of positive characteristics. Has a strong record of accomplishment as president. Trump leads significantly on that, Biden not getting so much credit. But then has the right temperament to be president, Biden leads on that, and Trump trails. So we got a couple of positive characteristics that go one way for each candidate. And finally, shares your values. Not much difference, but the bad news is it's less than 50%, 45 or less, that say either of these candidates shares their values, something that could be kind of an important issue, but really doesn't separate them. So if you look at why is this race still so close, part of it is we don't like either candidate, or 17% don't like either candidate. And part of it is that they each have strengths and also have weaknesses, and those are certainly kind of canceling each other out, again, pre-debate. Enthusiasm, we talked about that a minute ago in the panel, and I need to quit. All of our recent polling has shown enthusiasm in the mid-40s, the people who say they're very enthusiastic to vote this fall. It's not about enthusiasm for your candidate, but enthusiasm about the election. But that's down 13 points from where it was 4 years ago in June. It's down by more than 20 points over the course of the spring. So this is an issue, and it's an issue with real political bite, because the people who say they're very enthusiastic are overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. But then when you go to the somewhat enthusiastic, the not too enthusiastic, and the oh my goodness, don't wake me up, not at all enthusiastic, Biden has big leads over all of those. So when you mix all this together, you end up with our tied election, if all of these people vote. Will they? Well, we don't know at this point. Enthusiasm and certainty of voting is a psychological thing that changes over the course of the campaign. So none of this is set in stone. But where we are as of June is an extraordinarily high reported certain to vote, 98% for those very enthusiastic. That drops to 87, and then 73, and then 67. So all of that drop off is a problem for Biden in the groups that he's stronger with and where turnout falls. It's all an advantage to Trump because in that very enthusiastic group, people are really currently saying they're sure they're going to vote. I got to throw out one complicating factor, and that is, but if you look at their voting records in 2020 and 2022, Democrats in our surveys have a slightly higher rate of voting in all the elections between 20 and 22, 4 elections, 2 primaries and 2 generals, than Republicans do. And there's slightly more Republicans who say they didn't vote in any of those 4 elections. So this is a little reflection of that low propensity voter you hear about and the need to mobilize people who aren't regular voters, but who the Trump campaign succeeded in mobilizing in 16 and 2020. So both of these things are true. There's an advantage among the most enthusiastic for Trump, but there has been an advantage for Democrats in turning people out and actually getting them to the polls. But that's the past. We're looking to November, and we don't know the answer yet. That does have implications for the Senate race, and I want to say this real quick and wrap up. Sorry, Derek. The Senate race is pretty close with a slight Baldwin edge, but 18% haven't made up their minds, haven't thought about the race very much. The candidates are, Baldwin's fairly well known. Hovde is getting well known, but he's gone from over 80% that didn't know him in June a year ago to 44% that don't know him today. So he's still got a lot of introductions to make. And then finally, what does that top of the ticket enthusiasm or lack of it do to the down ballot races, especially with the state legislative races up for grabs after redistricting and the Senate race still on the table. So we'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Charles, I'm going to ask you to take that chair up there. I'm going to ask our panel to come back up to where they were seated. Charles, you'll take my spot.
Okay. I think John can come up here and get grilled.
Yeah. Well, John is available as well. So at this time, we're opening it up for any questions from the audience in regards to any of the speakers, any of our panelists. Hold on, we're going to bring a microphone down so that everybody can hear.
A tough question following the assassination attempt yesterday. I know it's really too soon to ask this question, but I'm going to pose it to probably you, most of all, Dr. Franklin. How do you see the assassination attempt against President Trump yesterday changing the course of the presidential campaign and also shaping the rhetoric that we'll hear during the RNC this week?
Sure.
Thank you.
I will acknowledge at the beginning the horrendous nature of that, and mixing that with politics is what we do all the time, but nevertheless, it feels a little odd to put that together. I don't see how there's any reason to believe this doesn't produce a short-term boost in support for Trump. I think it may produce some shift in rhetoric, at least in the short term. What it certainly does, though, is heighten the attention to the RNC. The VP announcement, which I'd like sooner rather than later so I can put in that name on my survey. And of course, the acceptance speech on Thursday night will almost surely have skyrocketing viewer interest and attention to it. So I think it shifts the focus away from Joe Biden where it's been for the last 2 weeks to Donald Trump, to the convention, and to both his VP selection and his speech on Thursday night.
Yes.
So for the studies that we saw today, do both parties use your results for their strategic planning?
Oh, they have so much more data than I have. They don't need anything I've got. People seem to pay attention to what we do, which I'm pleased with. But if you're running a campaign and you're looking at me for the data, you need to get a better campaign manager.
There are certainly those internal polls that are used by candidates that are well-financed to have internal polls that they can put out into the field with some regularity.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you all for doing this. Well, first I'll pose to the panel your reaction to the question about the assassination attempt and what you think folks in your community, how they are responding to it. I don't know if you've had the chance to interact with many people since it's been a very short time. So that'd be number one. And then Charles, for you, tell us a little bit about who these unenthusiastic voters are, and if they look different from unenthusiastic voters in the past.
I think it's the same reaction that we all are having. You know, it's shock, and you know, is this the level that these partisan races, the divides are getting to? And we certainly hope not, and hopefully that it'll put a pause on some of the rhetoric that is out there.
Is that what you think people are looking for at the RNC? Is we hope that they'll turn the temperature down rather than boosting it up?
Well, I think initially, that's going to be some of the reaction, but frankly, when you're in the hall this week, as I was explaining to the professor, I think today, if President Trump comes out and gives a reassurance speech, there will be a lot of attention on that. If he announces his VP candidate tomorrow, there will be a lot of attention on that. And then, of course, on Wednesday, the VP candidate will give their speech, and then on Thursday, President Trump will give his. And so there will be a lot of attention in that hall and a lot of enthusiasm in that hall, which is what you would hope to get out of a convention. Your grassroots folk going out into the field with a lot of enthusiasm for their candidates. And I expect that that is going to be off the charts this week.
I think that there's a lot of anticipation in the air right now just because of what happened with the assassination attempt. I think that people across the board in Wisconsin are kind of holding their breath and saying, who's going to make the first move and what's going to happen? From not a statistical level, but just perception of, word on the street and a few quick searches of what's going on Reddit right now. I think that people who are familiar with what the party's positions usually are kind of anticipating the left to say, look, this is proof we need to talk about guns and gun control and that sort of thing. Anticipating the right to say, well, wait a minute, we're the ones, that were the attacked or the victim here, and, we have a different perspective on this. And it may lead into that left versus right, let's make it about a policy thing, when the people that are going to vote are just holding their breath in anticipation and kind of scared of what does this mean? And I think it's back to that unity thing. The last time that Wisconsin really had this fever pitch feeling going on politically brings me back to the Scott Walker recalls and the Capitol sing-alongs. And at that time, Wisconsin was so divided. Every conversation was, which side are you on? Who do you agree with? Are you with them or with me? And now I think that everybody is just kind of frustrated and scared. And, I alluded to Milwaukee's Reddit feeds earlier, and, I saw last night people that live in the downtown area saying, particularly from the left, I'm scared because I feel like I need to get out of town, or I feel like something could be, or there could be retribution, or something going on. And I think if we can all just bring the temperature down a little bit and recognize that an assassination attempt on either side or toward any candidate, Those are the things that happen when we all go to fever pitch mode, and we need to bring it down a little bit and recognize some of that unity, and that's going to get us moving in the right direction.
Enthusiasm. So who's not so enthusiastic? Unsurprisingly, the double haters are very unenthusiastic, right? But also young people. Young voters under 30 are the most Democratic, the most liberal, and give Biden some of the lowest job approval numbers. And so there you have folks who were really important for Democratic victories in 2020 and in 2022, but seem quite disengaged at this point. Will they shift? I think you flip it, what's different from 2020 is we were down to just 5% among the double haters towards the end and a bit higher earlier. That was a race that really may have been primarily who are you against, but it wasn't alloyed by doubts about my candidate. This year you have doubts about both candidates. They're smaller than they were a year and a half ago when we polled, do you want Donald Trump to run in 21 and early 22? Do you want Joe Biden to run in 21 and early 22? We were saying well under 50% that wanted either one of them to run at that point. Now, they won their primaries. Here we are. But it is part of that notion that not only is it only opposition to the other guy, but it's also having actual reservations about your own guy as well.
Derek, I think we have time for one more, if it's a quick question.
We're going to do one more question, and just so you know, we're going to have the panelists are going to be available after the event itself is completed.
Charles, the Trump low prop voters, where are they? What does the data show, if any data, in the historical data too, where are these people, you know, like especially regionally?
Yeah, the low propensity voters, just to make sure I caught the question. First of all, they are pretty strongly for Trump. That's, you know, not a problem for him. On the other hand, they just haven't built this track record of turning out. And looking back all the way to 2000, you also have the younger voters who really weren't old enough to vote there. That's a further complication. But when you look at the enthusiasm level, that is really across most of Trump's subgroup constituencies that are pretty enthusiastic about him. The exceptions to that are the 20% or so of Republicans that still have an unfavorable view of Trump. That's down from about 30% before the primary process started. So the party has moved in his direction significantly since last November. But it still leaves 20% or so who are not excited or enthusiastic about the nominee. Very few of them are crossing over to vote for Biden, only about 6% of Republicans voting for Biden. So it's not like disenchantment with Trump is driving Republicans across the aisle, but it is lowering enthusiasm. Whether it affects voter turnout still remains to be seen as well.
All right, so I want to personally thank you all for coming here today. Thank you for coming to Marquette Law School. And if you could give a round of applause to our panel for taking time today to provide their insight. And as I mentioned, members of the panel will be available out in the Zilber Forum if you want to ask any more questions. Thank you very much. Enjoy your week.